Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the U.S. Naval Medical Center, San Diego's Level 1 Trauma Bay, a quiet storm of urgency filled the air. The smell of antiseptic, sweat, and blood blended with the soft hum of machines that marked the rhythm between life and death. It was late on a Friday night in July, and outside, the ambulances idled like restless beasts, their red strobes reflecting off the glass as the trauma team inside moved in perfect coordination. Every second counted. Every sound mattered. At the center of this orchestrated chaos stood Commander Emma "Doc" Walker, a battle-hardened U.S. Navy trauma surgeon whose calm precision had saved countless American lives on and off the battlefield. Her gloved hands worked with surgical grace as she fought to save a young U.S. Marine, Lance Corporal Ryan Brooks, just 19 years old, bleeding from a gunshot wound sustained during a live-fire mishap at Camp Pendleton. Her movements were efficient, almost rhythmic, clamping bleeders, suctioning blood, commanding her team in short, crisp sentences. Pressures dropping, 80/40, a nurse reported urgently. Without hesitation, Walker replied, "Push another unit of ONEG. Get the rapid infuser running." Her tone was steady, her focus absolute. She had done this before, too many times, in dusty field hospitals across Iraq and Afghanistan, where there were no second chances, no room for error. But just as the team began to stabilize the Marine, the trauma bay doors slammed open and authority walked in. Captain Robert Hale, Chief of Emergency Services, entered like a storm front, his polished shoes echoing on the linoleum, his expression hard and disapproving. His white coat flared behind him, as if to remind everyone that this was his domain. "Commander Walker," he barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the steady beeping of the monitors. "What the hell are you doing in my trauma bay with that necklace?" He jabbed a finger toward the stethoscope around her neck. The room didn't freeze, because trauma bays never do, but the tension shifted. Nurses paused mid-motion. The anesthesiologist looked up from his airway setup. Even the Marine, pale and fading fast, seemed to sense that something had changed. Commander Walker didn't look up. Her eyes stayed locked on the monitor as her hands worked deep in the wound. "Captain, I'm stabilizing a penetrating abdominal injury with hemorrhagic shock," she said evenly. "If you have a medical concern, I'll address it after we get this Marine to the OR. Hale stepped closer, his anger growing. "This isn't about the patient," he snapped. "It's about protocol. You're not ER staff. You're not credentialed to lead a trauma activation. And that," he pointed again, "is unauthorized medical equipment in my department. Remove it now." For a second, the only sound was the beeping heart monitor. The stethoscope around Walker's neck wasn't jewelry. It was a black Littman Cardiology 4, engraved with her name, issued by the U.S. Navy Medical Corps. That stethoscope had listened to the last heartbeats of American soldiers in Fallujah, aboard medevac Blackhawks over Helmand, and inside makeshift trauma tents under enemy fire. It was part of her. Without breaking focus, she finally looked up, eyes calm but firm. "Captain, this stethoscope is issued by the U.S. Navy Medical Corps. It's authorized under NAVMED P117, Article 1532. I am the senior trauma surgeon on call. I am credentialed, and I am not removing it while my patient is bleeding out." Hale's face flushed purple. "You are out of uniform, out of your lane, and out of line. Security!" he shouted. A young hospital corpsman hesitated near the door, caught between conflicting orders and fear. "Sir?" he asked quietly. Hale barked. "Escort Commander Walker from the trauma bay. She's relieved. And confiscate that contraband." The word contraband landed like an explosion. The corpsman froze, eyes darting from Hale to Walker, to the Marine whose blood pressure was now falling again, 70/30. Walker's voice dropped, low and steady. "Petty officer," she said, "if you touch me, you'll be committing assault on a superior officer. If you touch my patient, you'll be committing malpractice. Stand down." The corpsman stepped back, uncertainty written all over his face. Hale's anger turned to rage. "This is insubordination," he shouted. "I'll have you in front of the credentialing board by morning." He reached forward, his hand grabbing for the stethoscope around her neck. But before he could touch her, the doors swung open again, this time quietly, powerfully. The air shifted as Vice Admiral Grace Monroe, Surgeon General of the U.S. Navy, entered the trauma bay. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone commanded the room. Every officer snapped to attention, except Commander Walker, whose hands were still buried in a dying Marine. "Captain Hale," Monroe said, her tone calm but unyielding. "Stand down." Hale's hand dropped instantly. The entire trauma bay held its breath. Admiral Monroe walked closer, her eyes scanning the scene. The wounded Marine, the blood, the tension. "Commander Walker," she said evenly. "Status?" Walker answered without hesitation. "Gunshot wound to the right upper quadrant. Probable liver laceration. Possible IVC injury. BP 70/30. Tachycardic at 140. 2 units of O-neg in. Rapid infuser running. We need the OR now." Monroe nodded once. "You have it. OR1 is prepped. Take him." Walker didn't wait for permission. She gave orders. "Let's move, team." The gurney rolled. The team followed, and the chaos found direction again. As Commander Walker passed Vice Admiral Monroe, the Admiral placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Doc," she said quietly, using a nickname earned in war zones far from San Diego. "Good to see you in the fight." Walker gave a tight nod. "Wouldn't miss it, ma'am." The doors swung shut behind them, and the trauma bay exhaled. Behind them, Captain Hale stood frozen in place, humiliated by his own arrogance. Vice Admiral Monroe turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "Captain Hale," she said softly, "you were about to assault a decorated Navy trauma surgeon in the middle of a code. You were about to confiscate a medical device during a life-saving procedure. You were about to kill that Marine with your ego." Her words cut through the silence like a blade. "Do you even know who she is, Captain?" Hale stammered. She's a general surgeon assigned to—" Monroe interrupted him. "She's the reason the U.S. Navy changed its forward surgical doctrine in 2011. She's the reason our combat hospital on the USS Mercy has a 98% survival rate for penetrating trauma. She's the reason the Marine Corps sends its trauma fellows to train under her. And that so-called necklace you tried to rip off her neck?" Monroe's eyes hardened. "It's listened to more dying American hearts in combat than you've seen in your entire career." The color drained from Hale's face. The Vice Admiral turned to her Master Chief. "Relieve Captain Hale of duty. Suspend his credentials pending investigation." "Aye, aye, ma'am," came the reply. Monroe looked back at the stunned staff. "The rest of you, get back to work. And if anyone ever questions Commander Walker's authority in a trauma bay again, they'll answer to me directly." She paused, then added quietly, "And someone bring me her file. I want to know why she's not already wearing captain's bars." As Monroe left, the trauma bay came back to life. Monitors beeping, voices steady, purpose restored. In the scrub sink, Commander Emma Walker washed blood from her arms, her mind already in the operating room. Her phone buzzed beside her, a message from the Admiral. "Doc, you still owe me a beer from Ramadi. Or one. Save that Marine. Then we talk promotion." Emma smiled faintly, dried her hands, and pushed through the doors. The Marine had a chance, and so did the Navy. The air above Ramadi, Iraq, was a furnace of dust, heat, and gunpowder, thick enough to taste. It was August 2011, the kind of summer when the desert sun pressed down on the U.S. Marines like the weight of the entire war itself. At Forward Operating Base Ramadi, the surgical tent of the U.S. Navy Shock Trauma Platoon stood defiant amid the chaos. Canvas walls trembling under the rotor wash of incoming Blackhawks, sand swirling like ghosts through the cracks. Inside, under a single swaying light, Lieutenant Commander Emma "Doc" Walker fought a battle of her own, not against insurgents, but against death. Her surgical gown was soaked in sweat and blood, her hands deep inside the open wound of a Marine who'd been shot in the femoral artery during a firefight in the Malab district. The patient, Sergeant Jason Brooks, call sign Razor, was only 22. His life was leaking away, faster than any blood transfusion could keep up. "Pressure 60 over palp. Pulse 160. He's circling the drain," shouted the corpsman. Walker's voice cut through the noise, calm and firm like an anchor in a storm. "Clamp the bleeder. Suction. Get me the vascular kit. And tell the pilot to hold. We're not done here. The small team inside the tent moved as if they were one organism. Quick, focused, terrified. The smell of diesel fuel, copper, and adrenaline mixed with the buzz of generators. Her stethoscope, a battered black Littman engraved with her initials, hung heavy around her neck. It wasn't just a medical tool anymore. It was her identity, her history, her promise. She pressed it against the Marine's chest and heard what she dreaded. Heart sounds fading, distant, like thunder retreating into silence. Pericardial tamponade, she muttered. I need a 14-gauge needle. Now! The young corpsman hesitated. Ma'am, protocol says we wait for— Protocol says save the damn patient, she barked. He handed the needle. Without anesthesia, without hesitation, Walker plunged it into the Marine's chest, just below the sternum. A stream of dark blood filled the syringe, and with it, the monitor beeped stronger. We've got a pulse. Good. Pack the groin. We're moving him. But there was no real operating room, just a makeshift table, a few surgical kits, and the roar of helicopters overhead. The nearest surgical team was still en route from Camp Takatum, delayed by an IED strike en route Michigan. In that moment, Emma Walker was the only surgeon within 50 miles. She looked at her corpsman. You ever done a cut-down? No, ma'am. Then today's your lucky day. Her voice was steady, her eyes laser-focused. With one hand, she clamped the bleeding artery. With the other, she guided him through each step. Incision, dissection, saphenous vein cannulation. Good. Keep your hands steady. Don't think. Just move. The tent around them shook as another Black Hawk touched down. The pilot, a Marine major known by the call sign Viper, burst through the flap. Doc, we've got 2 more inbound. 1 chest wound, 1 double amputee. Birds full. We need to go now. Emma didn't even look up. Razor's not stable. Give me 3 minutes. You've got 2, Viper shot back. Then we're wheels up. She nodded. 2's enough. Her fingers worked fast, clamping, tying, packing, every motion a fight against the clock. All right, she said, breathing hard. Load him. We're doing this in the bird. The corpsman's eyes widened, but he obeyed. Within seconds, they were in the back of the medevac helicopter, its rotors screaming against the sky. The desert below blurred into streaks of red and gold. The cabin was chaos, blood bags swinging, sand whipping through the open door. Walker knelt between 2 stretchers, one hand on Sergeant Brooks's carotid pulse, the other sealing a chest wound on another Marine. Chest tube, now, she ordered. The corpsman handed her the tube, his hands trembling. She inserted it cleanly, swiftly, her stethoscope pressed to the patient's chest to confirm breath sounds. Good. Bilateral entry. Keep the airway clear. Over the intercom, Viper's voice cracked through. Doc, we're taking fire. Small arms, 2 o'clock. Tracers flashed through the cabin, orange streaks against the fading sun. 1 bullet punched through the fuselage, missing her by inches. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Stay steady, Major. We're not losing anyone today. Her calm defied the chaos. The pilot banked hard. The bird dipped. Alarm screamed, but Walker's world was narrowed to the pulse beneath her fingertips. 30 seconds, Viper yelled. She looked down at Brooks, his lips pale, eyes glassy. You stay with me, Marine, she said, voice low but fierce. You hear me? You're not dying in this desert. The helicopter slammed down at Camp Takatum Surgical Station. The doors flew open, and the trauma team rushed forward. Emma rattled off information faster than anyone could write it down. Femoral artery repaired. Pericardial window performed. Bilateral chest tubes. 2 units in. Pressure holding at 85/50. As they wheeled Brooks away, he grabbed her wrist. Weak, but determined. Doc, my name's Jason Brooks. She paused for just a heartbeat, that name sinking in. Jason Brooks? She said softly. You fight like hell in there. That's an order. He managed a faint nod before disappearing into the OR. Emma stood there for a moment, blood drying on her gloves, the sun catching her stethoscope as it swung gently against her chest. Behind her, the Black Hawk pilot approached, helmet tucked under his arm. You just saved 3 lives with a needle and a prayer, he said, shaking his head. "You're a damn miracle worker, Doc." Emma smiled tiredly. "Miracles are just math you haven't figured out yet." He laughed. "Beer's on me when we get home." "Make it a double," she replied, "and tell the Surgeon General she still owes me one from Fallujah." The pilot blinked. "Monroe? She'll be here next week. I'll tell her you called in your marker." Emma nodded, already turning back toward the trauma tent, where fresh litters were arriving. More Marines, more lives hanging by a thread. She didn't know it then, but her actions that day would ripple far beyond the sand and blood of Ramadi. The after-action reports would list her name next to 3 saved lives. One of them, Sergeant Jason Brooks, the same last name as the Marine she would save again 14 years later in San Diego. Coincidence or fate? No one could say. But the stethoscope that had listened to Jason's fading heartbeat in a helicopter over Iraq would one day hear the same rhythm again. Stronger, older, alive. As the sun set over the desert, Emma removed her gloves, washed her hands in a basin of warm, rusty water, and stared for a long moment at the streaks of blood swirling down the drain. In that moment, she wasn't thinking of promotions or medals. She was thinking of home, of silence, of how fragile a heartbeat really was. Somewhere outside, the faint echo of Doc Walker carried through the hot desert air as another medevac bird came in heavy with wounded Marines. Without a word, she reached for her stethoscope, slung it back around her neck, and stepped into the light of the surgical tent once more. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. The operating room of the U.S. Naval Medical Center San Diego glowed under white surgical lights that blazed like twin suns. Every surface gleamed with stainless steel perfection. Every sound, beeps, hisses, murmurs, blended into a symphony of precision and tension. It was here, in OR-1, that Commander Emma Doc Walker stood again at the head of the table, her movements calm and deliberate, her focus absolute. The patient before her, Lance Corporal Ryan Brooks, 19 U.S. Marine, lay unconscious, his abdomen open from xiphoid to pubis, his life balanced on the edge of steel and skill. His blood pressure hovered at 88/48, barely enough to keep him tethered to this world. Emma's stethoscope hung safely in her pocket now, close enough to touch, but out of the sterile field. It had been there before, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the heat of Ramadi, and now it had returned home to fight another battle. 10 blade, she said softly. The scrub tech placed it in her hand without hesitation. The blade glinted, descended, and a measured incision deepened. "Bookwalter," she said next. The retractor clicked into place with practiced rhythm, opening a view into the battlefield of the human body. "Liver laceration, grade 3. Retrohepatic IVC tear," she noted, her voice steady. "Lap pads, 4 of them." Her resident, Lieutenant Patel, obeyed immediately, suctioning as he worked. BP's dropping again. 72/40, Patel said, voice tight. "Cross-clamp the aorta," Emma ordered. "We need proximal control." Patel hesitated for half a second too long. "Ma'am, that's—" "Do it," she snapped, the firmness of command cutting through his fear. The clamp closed with a metallic click. Pressure stabilized at 90/50. The room exhaled as one. Emma's eyes flicked to the clock. It was 1947. They were racing time itself. "Vascular tray, 4-O-proline," she said. "I'm repairing the IVC." Patel oversaw the liver laceration. "Chief, call the blood bank. 6 units packed red cells, FFP, platelets, and someone get me Captain Hale. I need his hands in this room." The circulating nurse hesitated. "Captain Hale, ma'am?" Emma didn't look up. "He's board-certified vascular. I don't care if he's asleep. Get him." The nurse picked up the phone. Emma began stitching the IVC, each suture delicate and deliberate. Her hands didn't tremble. Her mind didn't wander. Years of battlefield surgery had honed her focus to something almost superhuman. Her sutures slowed the bleeding to a whisper. "Liver's controlled," Patel said. "No bile leak." "Good," she answered. "Release the aortic clamp." Slowly, Patel obeyed. The monitor responded, blood pressure rising to 110/70. For the first time, there was breathing room. That was when the OR doors opened, and Captain Robert Hale walked in, still in his white coat, his face taut with anger and pride. "Commander Walker," he said, barely containing himself. "What the hell is this? You relieved me in my own trauma bay, commandeered my operating room, and now you're—" She didn't look up. "Captain, scrub in. I need your hands. We'll discuss everything else after this Marine is safe." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the ventilator seemed to pause. Hale's jaw tightened. For a moment, it looked like he might turn and leave, but the sight before him, the bleeding Marine, the exhausted team, the surgeon standing unshaken at the center of it all, broke through his pride. Without another word, he stepped to the sink. The nurse handed him a gown and gloves. Minutes later, he stood beside her, assisting with the closure. "Start at the pubis," Emma said quietly. "Running suture. Meet me in the middle." Hale nodded once. Together, they worked in synchronized silence. For the first time, he saw her not as an intruder, but as what she truly was, a warrior with a scalpel. He read the dog tags as he worked. Brooks, R.L., Lance Corporal, United States Marine Corps. The name hit him with quiet force. Brooks. The same name that the Surgeon General had mentioned, the one tied to a combat citation from years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. When the last suture was tied and the final staple clicked shut, Emma stepped back, removing her gloves. "Chief, ICU bed 1, she said. "Vent settings per chart. Patel, you're with me on rounds." Hale turned toward her. "Commander." "Captain," she interrupted softly. "Not here. Not over a patient." He hesitated, then nodded. "My office. 800. She replied without looking back. "Make it 0900. I'll be in the ICU. Her stethoscope caught the light as she left the room. A flash of silver against blue. The OR fell silent again. The echo of respect lingering where anger once stood. Hours later, in the dim quiet of the intensive care unit, Emma sat beside Lance Corporal Brooks's bed. His vitals were stable, his chest rising rhythmically with the ventilator's hiss. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his, whispering, "You kept your promise, Marine. Now, you fight to keep it." The door behind her opened softly. Vice Admiral Grace Monroe stepped in, her white coat traded for scrubs, her face calm but serious. "Doc," she said, pulling up a chair. "You look like hell." Emma smiled faintly. "Feel like it too." Monroe sighed. "Hale's filed a formal complaint. He's accusing you of insubordination, unauthorized practice, endangering a patient, the usual bureaucratic garbage." Emma didn't flinch. "He can file whatever he wants. The patient's alive. That's what matters." Monroe nodded slowly. "I agree. But the credentialing board meets Monday. You'll need to be there." "I'll be there." Silence stretched between them for a moment. Then Monroe reached into her pocket and slid a small velvet box across the table. "This was supposed to happen 6 months ago," she said. "Paperwork, politics, excuses. But after tonight, it's yours." Emma opened it. Inside, a pair of silver captain's eagles gleamed beneath the fluorescent light. "I didn't do this for promotion," she murmured. Monroe smiled faintly. "That's why you deserve it." Standing, the Admiral looked down at her old friend. "And one more thing. That stethoscope, it stays right where it is. Anyone who tries to take it again answers to me." Emma's throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am." Monroe paused at the door. "Ramadi," she said quietly, "you saved my pilot's life with a needle and a prayer. I never forgot." Emma's reply was barely a whisper. "Neither did I." When Monroe left, Emma sat for a long moment, the faint hum of machines filling the room. She slipped the captain's eagles into her pocket, next to her stethoscope, feeling the weight of both, the rank she'd earned and the tool that had carried her there. The Marine stirred slightly, fingers twitching. Emma squeezed his hand and smiled. "Welcome back, Marine," she whispered. The ventilator hissed softly in reply. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to exhale. The conference room on the 5th floor of the U.S. Naval Medical Center, San Diego, smelled of stale coffee and the faint scent of bureaucracy. It was Monday morning, 8:57, and the credentialing board sat like judges behind a long oak table polished to a mirror shine. At the head sat Rear Admiral Paulson, the hospital's commanding officer, flanked by the Chief of Staff, the head of nursing, and a stern JAG officer. Beside them, Captain Robert Hale waited alone, his white coat crisp, his jaw clenched tight, his eyes fixed on the door. The air was tense, thick with unspoken judgment. At precisely 09, the door opened, and Captain Emma Doc Walker entered the room. Her uniform was immaculate, her new silver eagles gleaming against navy blue. The stethoscope hung around her neck, black and unassuming, just as it always had in war and peace alike. She carried no papers, no notes, no lawyer. Only the quiet confidence of someone who had stood at the edge of life and death and come back with both hands steady. Rear Admiral Paulson cleared his throat. "Captain Walker, you are here to address a formal complaint filed by Captain Hale regarding the events of July 14th in the Trauma Bay and Operating Room 1. Do you wish to make a statement?" Emma stood at ease, hands clasped behind her back, voice calm and measured. "Yes, sir. One sentence. The patient lived. Everything else is noise." A ripple went through the room. Hale's jaw tightened. The stenographer's fingers hesitated above her keyboard. Paulson nodded toward the JAG officer. "Proceed." The JAG, a commander with a gravelly voice, began reading. "Captain Hale alleges insubordination, unauthorized assumption of command, and endangerment of a patient under his care. He requests immediate suspension of Captain Walker's surgical privileges pending investigation." Hale stood then, his voice controlled but burning. "Sirs, ma'ams, this officer undermined my authority, violated hospital protocol, and performed high-risk surgery without authorization. Her actions were reckless, insubordinate, and—" Emma interrupted softly but firmly. "Captain Hale attempted to remove me from an active trauma case and ordered security to confiscate my stethoscope during a code. His actions, not mine, endangered the life of a Marine in hemorrhagic shock." Hale turned red. "That stethoscope was unauthorized equipment. It is Navy-issued medical gear," Emma replied evenly. "Under NavMed P-117, Article 15-32, Section B. I can quote it verbatim if you'd like." The head of nursing, a Master Chief with 3 decades of service, leaned forward. "Captain Hale, did you verify Captain Walker's credentials before issuing your order?" Hale hesitated. "She was not ER staff. I believed she—" "Answer the question," Rear Admiral Paulson said sharply. Hale's voice dropped. "No, sir, I did not." The JAG officer slid a file across the table, opening it for the record. "Captain Emma Walker, MD, FACS, board certified in general and trauma surgery, 312 combat surgical cases, Navy Cross, Bronze Star with Valor, 3 Purple Hearts, lead author of the Joint Trauma Systems Forward Resuscitation Guidelines, current survival rate for penetrating abdominal trauma, 97%, highest in the Department of Defense." The room fell silent. Hale swallowed hard. Paulson looked up from the file. "Captain Walker, your response to the charge of insubordination?" Emma's eyes were clear, her voice even. "Sir, in a trauma bay, rank doesn't save lives. Skill does. I was the senior trauma surgeon on call that night. Captain Hale was not present when the patient arrived. I assumed command under ATLS protocol as required. My actions saved that Marine's life. His would have cost it." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade. Finally, the Chief of Staff, a Rear Admiral with salt and pepper hair, leaned forward. "Captain Hale, do you stand by your decision to relieve a decorated surgeon mid-code and attempt to seize her medical equipment?" Hale's voice cracked. "I believed she was acting beyond her authority. And you now know you were wrong," Paulson said quietly. Hale's shoulders slumped. "Yes, sir, I was wrong." Rear Admiral Paulson turned to the board. "Motion to dismiss all charges against Captain Walker with prejudice." "Seconded." "Seconded," said the Chief of Staff. "Unanimous," added the Master Chief. "Motion carries," Paulson declared. He looked to Hale. "Captain Hale, you are hereby censured for conduct unbecoming of an officer and relieved of your position as Chief of Emergency Services. You will undergo remedial leadership and trauma command training before reassignment." The JAG officer handed Hale a formal letter. "You have 72 hours to clear your office." Hale accepted it with shaking hands. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Understood, sir." Emma didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't move. She simply saluted the board, then turned and walked out. The echo of her boots faded down the hallway, replaced by the soft hum of hospital life carrying on. Later that afternoon, at 14:30, Emma stood in the base exchange aisle, still in uniform, scanning shelves of cereal as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That was when a quiet voice stopped her. "Captain Walker?" She turned. Standing a few feet away, now dressed in civilian clothes, was Captain Robert Hale. He looked exhausted, older somehow, his eyes sunken with the weight of guilt. "I wanted to apologize," he said simply. "I read your file. I watched the footage from Ramadi. I didn't know." Emma studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Apology accepted," she said. "But don't apologize to me. Apologize to the Marine who almost died because you hesitated. And to every nurse, corpsman, and resident you ever belittled. That's where you start." Hale's throat tightened. "I will," he said, eyes glassy. "And thank you for saving him, for saving me, in a way." Emma gave a faint nod, her expression softening. "We all have blind spots, Captain. The trick is learning to see." He nodded, tears threatening, then turned and walked away, smaller, but maybe for the first time, truly human. A month later, the ICU was quiet, except for the rhythmic whoosh of ventilators and the faint buzz of afternoon light. Lance Corporal Ryan Brooks sat up in bed, scars tracing his abdomen like a roadmap of survival. When Emma entered the room, he grinned weakly. Abdomen like a roadmap of survival. When Emma entered the room, he grinned weakly. "Doc," he said, voice rough. "Heard you got promoted for saving my sorry hide." Emma smiled. "Language Marine?" "Yes, ma'am," he said with a chuckle. "How's the pain?" she asked, checking his chart. "Manageable, but I have a question," he said, hesitating. "That night in surgery, they told me you were in Ramadi years ago, that you saved a Marine named Jason Brooks. Same last name, same blood type. You think?" He trailed off. Emma's eyes softened. "I think the universe has a funny way of circling back," she said, "and I think you're both fighters." She handed him a small box. Inside, a polished challenge coin gleamed under the light, engraved with the Navy emblem and the words, "To Lance Corporal Ryan Brooks, from one survivor to another." He turned it over. On the back it read, "Semper Fi, Doc." His voice caught. "Thank you." Emma smiled. "No, Marine. Thank you for keeping your promise." As she left the room, the sound of monitors faded behind her. In the hallway, Vice Admiral Grace Monroe waited, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a faint smile on her face. "Beer?" she asked. Emma grinned. "Double. You're buying." They walked down the corridor together, two women who had seen hell and brought others back from it. Their footsteps echoed softly beneath the fluorescent lights, steady, confident, alive. Outside, the sun was setting over San Diego Bay, casting gold across the water. In that light, Emma's stethoscope caught the last rays of day, gleaming against her uniform. It had heard the final heartbeats of fallen Marines, and the first strong rhythms of those who made it home. It had been called a necklace once, by someone who didn't understand what it meant. But for Emma Walker, and for every medic, corpsman, and surgeon who had ever fought to keep a heartbeat going, it was something far greater. Because sometimes, the measure of courage isn't found in medals or promotions. It's found in a single sound, the quiet, steady heartbeat of someone you refuse to give up on. And that heartbeat is the sound of sacrifice. Every story you hear on Stories of Sacrifice carries a heartbeat, one that belongs to someone who chose courage over comfort, duty over fear, and sacrifice over self. Some of you are watching right now. You've worn that same uniform. You've served. You've saved lives. Or maybe you've lost someone who did. If you know a hero, past or present, share their name in the comments. Let's turn this space into a living tribute, a wall of remembrance where every heartbeat and every story is honored. Comment their story. Like to show your respect. Subscribe if you believe their sacrifices should never be forgotten. Share this episode with someone who still believes in the spirit of service and the strength of the American heart. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we remember the people who gave them meaning. This is Stories of Sacrifice.